Hi, this is Ben Abbas reporting for Yorkshire Live. I'm here in Centenary Square in Bradford. There is a Free Palestine protest going on behind me. The Labour MP Richard Virgin is speaking now, and then later on Jeremy Corbyn's going to be speaking. You can see there's a fair few people behind us, plenty of Palestinian flags. Just show you on there. On a beautiful sunny day in Centenary Square in Bradford. I'm going to spin you around and we're going to go listen to the Labour MP Richard Virgin.
With the brutal royal family in Saudi Arabia. It's outrageous. People trying to blame Jewish people in our country for the actions of the Israeli government. We must be united. We must build a bigger campaign, but we must not ignore, and I'll just about finish on this, we must not ignore the push to further militarisation, the push to further war. There's been a record increase in military spending in this country at the same time when they say they can't afford to pay our nurses properly. They can't afford to give a 15% pay rise to our NHS workers supposedly, but they can spend billions more on extra nuclear weapons and annihilate we must resist the push to the Cold War in China. We must push to resist the expansion of further weapons of mass destruction. A Cuban called Jose Marti once said, "Humanity is our homeland." I believe that firmly. I believe this demonstration is an example of that. And let's remember the words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians also." Good luck on building Bradford to stop the war. Free Palestine. Palestine will exist. Palestine has the right to exist, and it will. Wow, thank you very much, Richard. If only you had been elected as the deputy leader of the Labour Party, we would have had a different world in history. Just imagine Jeremy Corbyn as the Prime Minister and Richard Virgin as the Deputy Prime Minister. How would that be? Maybe one day this through we can all agree. Palestine! 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 Palestine will be free! Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Our next speaker is my dear colleague, my dear sister, she's younger than me, but she's a little bit of a mentor, former colleague, friend for life, my sister, my dear friend, Salma Yaqub.
Good afternoon, Bradford! I'm so proud to come back to the city of my birth, to see all the people here who have been steadfast and consistent in the fight for equality, justice and peace. I became politicised 20 years ago when our country was preparing to go to war in Afghanistan after the horrendous events of 9/11. As a young mum then, I couldn't imagine that in the name of innocents who've been killed, thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions more, would be killed. And we done so in my name, in your name, in our name, from the UK. And that's why some of us came together to say not in our name, by forming the Stop the War Coalition. And Jeremy and Lindsay, who are speaking today, were part of the
Richard
who have
Bergen.
been accused of war.
See the other guy in the black? Yeah. I went to school with
It's
him.
heard
Yeah.
that the war on terror is
Yeah, as in we were in the same class. And he's just noticed me and he's just like, yeah, we were.
Be it the Chinese, Uyghur Muslims,
Haven't seen
be
him
it the
since
Palestinian
97.
Muslims, be it the Kashmiri Muslims, be it the
And you
Indian
know, he
Muslims
still speaks with
who
the
are
same,
facing persecution, genocide,
what's the word,
torture,
passion that he
murder,
used to do when he was
because
at school.
this
He was head
so-called
boy at
war on
school.
terror
Yeah.
legitimised the oppressors
Yeah, well,
everywhere.
We were in the
to
same
use that
classes together and we were
racist
part of the same.
against
So our school we
everywhere.
had
And
a
right here at
speaking
home in
debate
the
team
UK,
and we were part of the same team.
with the
I
prevent
still remember his,
legislation,
you know,
we
the
are
speeches
seeing
he used
kids
to write and
young
the
and
competitions
fine
and it was just a joy to
being
listen to
labelled
him. And he still has the same
We are seeing in our
mannerisms
schools
as
and
we
universities students who talk about Palestine, who question justice,
I had no
who want
idea.
to stand for humanity,
So I work as a teacher, I didn't have a
being
clue.
threatened,
I literally didn't have a clue until
and expulsed.
3 o'clock this
So
afternoon.
that war
A
has
colleague
come
told
here.
me, his lesson is
I
over
used to
there, and
love
he
and
happened
be
to
proud
mention,
of the fact
yeah,
that we
Jess is
have
going to be in
freedom of
Bradford and
speech
Richard
in this
Bergen, and I
country.
went,
But
hang on a minute, I went to school with Richard Bergen, he was a friend of mine,
partly because
and
we
we
have
looked
been
it up, and
successful,
sure enough,
partly because they felt the threat.
he must have done
The
it.
establishment felt
I
so
just
threatened
didn't.
by Jeremy Corbyn.
You know, sometimes you just miss things, you know. And I do watch Newsnight, but obviously I just didn't see him at the time, and I was like, didn't have a clue. I genuinely didn't have a clue. So it's a lovely surprise, and still seeing pictures of
Who has been consistent with his anti-war stance. They are terrified that we may get a pro-peace government, a pro-peace Prime Minister. God forbid we'd have that in the UK. God forbid we'd have an ethical foreign policy. God forbid we'd have somebody in 10 Downing Street who actually cared for the poor, who cared for the disadvantaged, who cared for the marginalised.
studied
In this
at
country, in our towns and
and then I
villages,
moved down to
cities, up
London,
and
and I
down
studied
this land.
down in London. This is pretty. What did you do? My mum used to work at Legion, so I know they my mum was
We are united here.
my mum was
Black,
my mum
white,
was an
brown,
architect that worked for Leeds University, so I knew the campus very well.
Muslim, Hindu, Christian,
Whenever there was-
atheist, people from
Yeah.
all
But
backgrounds and races. This has been
I
the
still
beauty
remember
of our
going into the
solidarity.
what's the
This
library
is
called
what
now?
gives us strength
Big
in this
library.
And I want to thank each and every one of you.
Yeah, there was
Come out.
because there was Brotherton Hall,
It is people like
and there's
you
the big main
who
library.
hope to all of us
I
and the
used
rest
to,
of the world.
if we had
With
like
people like you who inspire
you know,
us
projects to do at school,
We heard
my
people
mum
in
used to
Egypt
take me to the
say,
library.
we saw
Sit me in the
people
library.
marching in England,
You know, when
coming
as a
together
kid in high
for
school,
our rights, and we were
it was
inspired
having
to
access
come
to,
out
we
and
had the
be
library at
empowered
school.
to come out
This
for
was
our
something
rights.
completely
And
different.
now we are looking
You know,
to those
getting to
people,
actually
to the
see
Palestinians
this
who are not
colossal-
deterred despite the oppression, despite the aggression, and we are now inspired by them and their dignity and their solidarity
and
and
just
their
seeing
thirst for freedom
seeing all these
and
books.
not being apologetic
all
about
books.
standing up for
You know,
their
and
rights.
literally it was,
So we are
I
now
need this section. I
in
used
a
to go to
very
the librarian. I've
interesting
forgotten her
space.
name now, but I used to go to the
We are
librarian.
now having to fight for our rights.
I'm doing a
and
project
that
on
is
this, so
showing
she would take me to
solidarity.
the books that I need, and I would take
But the
down.
march
And there's me,
we was never easy.
you know, probably
All
not
the
much older
struggle
than your son,
because
sat with all
it
these,
is struggle.
you know,
But
much
we
older
have
students. And,
good people on our
you know,
side.
sometimes I was
And
even there in
we
my
have
school uniform going
principles
through
on our
books,
side.
you
And
know,
the
trying to
Lord
find
our
information.
We know
Now everything's on
that we
Google.
will.
It was so different when your mum and I were at
Thank you very much, Alma. And my apologies about the
I remember paper cuts.
discussion we've been having regarding the sound system. As you can see, we have great big speakers right here in front of us, but the power generator seems to have not been on our site today, so my apologies for that. My next guest today, ladies and gentlemen, is a lady who is the convener of Stop the War movement, a lady who I've known since the beginning, the formation of the Stop the War movement back in 2001. I think it was friends somewhere in London we had a meeting. She's most vocal about peace, justice, and matters to do with peace, justice, and equality. A very dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please give her a big hand to convener of Stop the War movement. Mrs. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everybody being here today. I want to say a little bit about Palestine. We've built a huge solidarity movement against the attacks on the Palestinians over the last few weeks. And it seems to me that as people living in Britain, with our history in Palestine, with the role of the British Empire over the last 100 years in Palestine, and with the way in which Britain is still supporting Israel in everything that it does, it is only right that we demonstrate and we protest and we boycott and we do all these things in solidarity with the Palestinians. And we have built a huge movement internationally. The movement has been so big because it is partly because of what we have done here, but more importantly what the Palestinians themselves have done by uniting the people in the West Bank, the people in Gaza, the people in Israel itself, and the people in Jerusalem. All the Palestinians have come together, and this is what terrifies the Israelis, it terrifies the British, and it terrifies Joe Biden as well. And that is why we have to continue campaigning over it. And I don't just want to talk about Palestine tonight because Palestine is one of the major international issues that affect the whole world. But of course it is not the only one. We have so many issues that we are facing in this country, and we have one of the richest countries in the world which cannot feed its children, which cannot house its homeless, which cannot provide a decent standard of living for millions of people, but it can engage in war after war. It can arm the Israelis, it can build arms sales in Saudi Arabia, it can help wage a war in Yemen. It is an absolutely disgusting government. And it's a government not just which is involved in the things, it also tries to divide and rule us. And one of the ways it tries to divide and rule us is around the question of racism. And whether it is Islamophobia, or whether it's the way that the black footballers were treated last week when they missed the penalties, there is something deeply rotten in this society, and it doesn't come from the bottom, it comes from the top. Instead of turning against them. And when we set up Stop the War 20 years ago, we said the wars would lead to greater death and destruction than anything that had been seen on 9/11. 9/11 was a tragedy of huge proportions, but the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya have cost far more lives, have led to far more instability, and we are still suffering from those things. We said it would also lead to attacks on the Muslim community, and it has led to attacks on the Muslim community. And I'm ashamed to see Keir Starmer attacking the Muslim community in the way that he did in the Batley and Spen by-election, because that was a disgrace as well. We also said it would lead to an attack on our civil liberties, and we are seeing the policing bill go through Parliament, which is going to try and stop protests like this. It's going to make it much harder for us to demonstrate and to do all the things that we want to do. So we have to say today, when we talk about relaunching Stop the War in Bradford and across the whole of Yorkshire and elsewhere in the country, we have to say it is so important that we get organised and we defend ourselves and our right to protest. At the moment we have a situation where the war in Afghanistan is coming to an end, or at least the British and American involvement in Afghanistan is coming to an end. Has it solved the problems of the people of Afghanistan? Not at all. Has it led to peace in Afghanistan? Not at all. Has it led to the liberation of women we were told was going to be a result of it? Not at all. So we have to say 20 years on, what was that war for? It was for nothing at all, apart from the aims of imperialism, of American imperialism, of British imperialism, and of all their allies. It is absolutely shameful. And I'm very proud that we established Stop the War 20 years ago. Here on the left, Salma Yaqub has been such an inspiration to generations of young Muslim women, and particularly for other women as well. Jeremy Corbyn has played such a big role in opposing war right weapons and on the military rather than spending it on the things that we need. But it is not an all-powerful government. We are the majority. We are the opposition in this country. We are the people who can begin to fight for change, and that's what we should be doing today. So please do everything that you can to build the Stop the War coalition, to support the Stop the War coalition. Most importantly, do everything you can, solidarity with the Palestinians, fight against racism, and fight against these and future wars, because these future wars are coming as well. There is war coming against Russia, China, all of these things are on the agenda as well. We have to make it clear, we as a country are against the kind of policies our government is putting forward, and that is why we are fighting to build stop and to build an opposition to the kind of imperialism that has dogged the lives of millions of people around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, we have another speaker. This gentleman is not unknown to you all. He's an MP. Any idea who he might be?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Ladies and gentlemen, Member of Parliament for Bradford East, Imran Hussain, given the biggest hand, ladies and gentlemen. He cancelled many appointments to be here today, so we're very grateful. A man who has been very vocal when it comes to Palestine, a man who has been very vocal when it comes to Kashmir, and he's loved in Bradford like not many other people in our country. It's a great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you Member of Parliament for Bradford East, Imran Hussain. Give him a big hand.
Okay, so if you're just joining us, this is Ben Abbas reporting for Yorkshire Live. I'm here in Centenary Square in Bradford at a Stop the War coalition have organised a Free Palestine protest. You can see there's a couple of hundred people, I'd say, here, Palestinian flags. Behind me, the Labour MP for Bradford East is speaking, Imran is there now. So he's speaking at the moment, and then shortly afterwards, I think Jeremy Corbyn's speaking. He's going to be following. He's sat behind him at the moment. I think there was quite a bit of anticipation just now when he said that an MP was speaking. Everybody thought it was going to be Jeremy Corbyn, but I think he's coming up next. So in about five minutes or so. So I'll spin you back round and take you in.
Even though you haven't got your
Because Bradford has always been firm in that nobody chooses to be a refugee. Nobody chooses to face persecution and oppression and is forced to flee their homes. Nobody willingly gets on a boat with their young children, knowing that they are almost certainly facing death. So let's be clear, refugees are forced to be refugees, and anyone fleeing persecution, oppression and injustice is welcome in this great city of country. Friends, but let us be clear, racism and persecution sadly remain far too prevalent in our society. We only have to look at the football last weekend. And I also want to be clear, Bradford stands in solidarity with Marcus Rashford, with Bukayo Saka, with Jadon Sancho, and with and I want to be equally firm that in Bradford, racism, persecution, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and any other form of hatred will never be welcome and will never ever be tolerated. Unlike under this government, where we have a Home Secretary that stokes the fires of racism and a Prime Minister who thinks it's acceptable to engage in blatant, vile Islamophobia by describing Muslim women as letterboxes and bank robbers, language that would frankly not be out of place in a far-right rally. Shame on this government! Friends, as Bradfordians, we are very proud because we have stood against oppression, persecution, and injustice wherever that is. And as we stand here today, we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians who continue to live under a long and brutal siege in Gaza, who continue to face indiscriminate attacks at the hands of the Israeli government, who continue to be handed disproportionate sentences in biased trials in unfair military courts, who continue to see their children placed in military detention and continue to see their lands and villages bulldozed to make way for illegal settlements. Yet the international community remains silent. We stand in solidarity with the sons and daughters of Kashmir who continue to see their birthright and self-determination denied, continue to face horrific human rights abuses at the hands of the Indian Armed Forces who are effectively granted immunity for their crimes, continue to have their rights and freedom eroded by a right-wing Indian government that strips away what little autonomy they had left, and continue to see their homeland annexed by the occupying Indian army. Yet the international community remains silent. And we stand in solidarity with the Rohingya who continue to flee their homes in one of the gravest refugee crises that the world has ever seen, continue to have their villages burned and razed to the ground by the Burmese military, and continue to be forced to live out their lives in what is the largest refugee camp in the world. Yet again, the international community remains silent. And friends, we have seen this time and time again. Instead of taking action, the international community, those who we look to safeguard human rights and protect those in need, remain shamelessly silent in their condemnation of such human rights abuses and refuse to enforce UN Security Council resolutions. And they repeatedly, and let's be clear about this, they repeatedly give free license to those throughout the world committing human rights abuses and committing war crimes. So as we relaunch Stop the War campaign in Bradford today, we make it clear that we will never be silent, and we call on the UK government and the international community to wake up, to immediately recognize Palestine. voting for? Yes. Well, can I make a quick announcement before?
Of course.
We've got hundreds of boxes of food for you, good ladies and gentlemen. And I don't see anybody munching while you're listening. So, please do come forward to the front and take boxes of food, take one, take two. Please make a donation. We've got a lot of money to pay for things like iron and personnel. And we have, what's that? Yeah, we have rice, biryani, chicken biryani. Who likes chicken biryani? Put your hand up.
Come on, everyone likes that.
Who likes vegetable biryani? Put your hand up.
Go.
Who likes samosas and chaat?
Hey!
But they're all over there. And they're only £1 or £2 a box if you wish to donate.
Yeah,
Please do. It'll be a great value. Otherwise, we've got hundreds of boxes which will have to be given away. So please do make use of them. And we thank our sponsors, Aziz Catering, Mandla Catering, Bismillah Catering, and thank you.
You spotted me. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna ask Chief Guest Speaker
He literally saw me
to come to the stage and address you
He said to him,
in his own inimitable way.
went to school with.
A man who has stood up for justice, not just in the last few years,
Mannerisms haven't changed.
but throughout his whole
Haven't
life.
changed at all.
He's always stood
Still
for
the same
justice,
Richard
peace
that I
and
remember
equality. He
how
has
he used to do
always
his
been against
competitions in school
racism,
at 15, 16.
whatever type it may manifest itself, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's discrimination of any kind. It's not a secret. This man has a lifetime record in the public that he is one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, he has been suspended from the Labour Party for speaking those words that we all feel, but he has suffered the consequences. I invite my friends here in Bradford and wherever else in this country my voice may reach. Let's support this man, otherwise we will never have another man who will stand up for us and suffer the consequences. It's now or forever lose people like this. And those who have come from outside of Bradford,
Does that make sense?
my dear countrymen, it gives me immense pleasure to announce Mr. Jeremy Corbyn!
Palestine! 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 Palestine!
Thank you for coming, thank you for that lovely welcome, and thank you so much to everyone that organised today's event. You, Chair, all the helpers, all the volunteers, and you, us, for putting so much together, in putting this event on today. Thank you very much indeed. These events don't happen by accident. They happen because people believe, people want to see change, people want to do things differently, want to promote solidarity. This great city of Bradford was the cradle, the birth, in many ways, of the Labour movement in this country. The Independent Labour Party founded here.
The Bradford Declaration
Many of those that founded the ILP
Israeli Jewish
had a vision
to settle in
of a country
Yeah, I remember
that
that.
cared for each other,
Yes, I remember
in
that.
health, in education, in housing, in provision of libraries, of learning, and of opportunities for young people.
and
That stood up against the mill owners and those that have exploited people so grievously. They stood with the trade unions and so much else. Bradford has given so much to the Labour Party and the Labour movement, and indeed through that to the world all over. Bradford also was a place that seriously opposed the imperial and colonial wars of the 19th century, that opposed the Boer War, the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and had a very big anti-war movement in 1914, who took the view that workers in this country would benefit naught by killing workers in Germany. The war was actually between the imperial powers of those two nations, and they sought a Europe and indeed a world of peace. So when our children learn the history of the foundation of the unions and so much else, they will come back to Bradford to understand what went on here and the contribution that Bradford made to our collective history. And I wish we had a government in office and a Secretary of State for Education that understood our children should be empowered by history, not fed propaganda against their own history. This event is also, of course, about solidarity. Solidarity with people all around the world. Much has been said about solidarity with the people of Palestine, and I absolutely endorse that. My stomach turns when I see F-16 jets bombing homes in Gaza. Homes also on the West Bank being destroyed by those who believe that settlers have a right to take over the West Bank. I want to see peace. I want to see nationhood for the Palestinian people, and I would want us to have a government, as I wanted to be the head of a government that would unconditionally recognise the state of Palestine. So our solidarity with the people of Palestine, and as Richard and others pointed out, recognise that there are many people in Israel who would agree with what we're saying, in Bethlehem and the human rights groups that also support the rights of the Palestinian people. If you want peace anywhere, you have to have the rights that go with it, the legal protections that go with it, and that right to your own representation. So our solidarity with the people of Palestine is expressed here today, as indeed is our solidarity with the people of Kashmir. Kashmir, in 1948, it was not included into the state of India. It was declared by the United Nations, where it was referred to by Nehru, that should be the place of a referendum for the people of Kashmir to decide their own future. It is not a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. It is a human rights issue for the people of Kashmir. That we have to recognise. As indeed on the many other issues around the world that have been spoken of today. Internationalism is something we have to practice at home as well as practice abroad. And reference was made to the Rohingya people that have been driven out of Myanmar into refugee camps in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar. 1 million people in one refugee camp. I hope they get the right to go home. I hope they get the right to go back to Rakhine State. And I hope the Myanmar of the future is a democracy where all languages, all ethnicities and all faiths will be recognised and respected. Not tolerated, respected. There's quite a big difference between those words. But in the meantime, it looks awfully like a long-term refugee camp, sadly not unlike the refugee camps the Palestinian people were forced into in 1948. So our solidarity must be with them and with brave people in Myanmar fighting back against the military dictatorship. And a couple of nights ago I was on a conference with trade union activists in Myanmar who are standing up for workers' rights and for jobs and for the functioning of the economy and for the diversity of their country. Just because the mainstream media decide that Myanmar is no longer of any interest, it is an interest to all of us. We have to keep up that pressure and keep up those demands. When we founded the Stop the War Coalition 20 years ago, I never thought 20 years on we'd still be meeting and still be campaigning against injustice and wars. I did not believe it would go on so long. But I have to pay huge tribute to those that founded the Stop the War Coalition,
to Salma, to Chris, to Lindsay, to John, to Tarek, to Andrew Murray and so many others that were there from the very beginning in 2001 and are still there doing it today. And on September the 18th, the Stop the War Coalition will be holding a big rally in central London in order to commemorate 20 years on, but redouble our efforts to stop the wars of tomorrow. We were not founded, as some people think, to oppose the war in Iraq. We were founded to oppose the bombing of Afghanistan after the terrible events of 9/11. I remember like it was yesterday, at that rally, Bruce Kent, who spoke there, said, "It's very easy to unleash the dogs of war. It's very hard to get them back in the kennels afterwards." That bombing went ahead, that occupation went ahead, and sadly, a very small number of us in Parliament voted against that war in 2001. Then talk began about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but during the same time, the war got worse in Afghanistan, but got less reporting, and now we have a US government calling for a future of Afghanistan that is a coalition between the existing government and the Taliban. You couldn't make it up. Sadly, tens of thousands have died, including 450 British soldiers in that interim period. Billions has been spent. Poverty has increased. Refugee flows have increased. And there's no end in sight to the insecurity, the poverty and the conflict for the people of Afghanistan. So I say to any putative or future politician, when you sit on the green benches in Parliament and somebody urges you to go to war, it's not their children they're sending to war. It's not their children that are going to be bombed. It is somebody else's and somebody else's. It's easy to wrap yourself in the flag in that moment of glory. But think of the consequences 10, 20 and 30 years on, when the poverty and the refugees still continue. That is the price of war. As I was saying, during that period, we then had talk of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, just a word of health warning here. In the 1990s, I tabled motions in Parliament to end the arms trade with Iraq, to stop arming Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And I was told by various people, steady on, you're upsetting the British arms trade, can you kindly shut up about this? Iraq is a very important market for us. I didn't shut up, I carried on doing that. And as the claims of weapons of mass destruction grew ever more bizarre, we campaigned against that war. We campaigned as strongly as we could against that war. More than 1 million, maybe 2 million people were in London that day on September the 15th, 2003. And sadly, I can remember my own speech like it was yesterday. I said, the war of today will beget the wars of tomorrow, the refugee flows of tomorrow, the terrorism of tomorrow, the poverty of tomorrow. And what has happened in refugee camps all over the region, all over the Middle East, with that rush to war at that time. And so, think very carefully about the consequences of wars and going to war. We went on, we bombed Libya and killed a very large number of people. And what did we create? A functioning democracy or a civil war in that country. We bombed in Syria, and I'm not here to defend any particular side in Syria. Instead of seeking a way forward that speaks for all of the people of Syria, we took part in bombardment instead. There has to be a different and a better way of resolving conflicts in the world than the wealthiest and most powerful in the world buying arms from the biggest and most powerful countries in the world in order always to bomb the poorest and most desperate people who years later are trying to eke out an existence in refugee camps all over the world. that doesn't talk in grandiose terms about world leadership, about aircraft carriers going around the world, about a Cold War with China or a Cold War with Russia, or a Cold War or a hot war with anybody else. Real security isn't the ability to kill others. Real security is the ability to know you've got food, you've got schools, you've got hospitals, you've got clean air, you've got clean water, and you've got a secure future for your children in a society where you're free to speak. That is what real security is about. And before anybody calls me unpatriotic for this, I would simply say my view on patriotism is that yes, I'm very patriotic for all of the people of this country. That's why I want them to have a free and fully functioning health service, a free and fully functioning education service, an end to the necessity of food banks, an end to rough sleeping, an end to poverty, a decent pay and decent wage for all. These are surely the issues of social justice that we have to put forward. And so, we campaign. The organisation that I founded after I stepped down from being leader of the Labour Party, the Project for Justice and Peace, is organising on all these issues. Organising on all these issues to mobilise people and to give people voice. And tomorrow afternoon, we're holding a seminar, big function, online, Facebook, etc., etc. You can easily access it on the arms trade and the effects of the arms trade and the corruption that the arms trade brings in. And I say that because if we don't challenge the pressure of arms manufacturers and arms traders, then we will get ourselves involved with more wars and more conflict. And so we have to defend, support and protect the jobs of those that work in all industries, while we as a society move into something more sustainable, a cleaner, greener, more peaceful future. It is all about public investment and public intervention. It's not all about handing out billions of pounds to Serco and calling that the solution to the COVID crisis. It is about investment in the needs of our people. The points I want to conclude on quite simply this. Our Stop the War movement was founded to unite people against wars. We united millions on that day 18 years ago. We can unite people still on all these issues. Look at those that turned out in support of peace in the Middle East and of Palestine. But we unite people by not allowing ourselves to be divided. The right and the racists in our society will always seek to divide us. Look at the gruesome history of mid-20th century Europe. The way a small, ultra-right, crazy, apparently insignificant organisation called the Nazi Party in Germany was founded and started to grow on the basis of attacking the Jewish community. They promoted and fed on anti-Semitism. That ended up with the Holocaust and the gas chambers and the genocide against the Jewish people. That is where racism leads you to. And so, in understanding our history, we empower ourselves to oppose racism. Black Lives Matter, founded in 2013, was a black community in the USA saying, we've had enough. We've had enough of police brutality, a failure to recognise our history or our victimhood or our discrimination, a failure to teach the real history of the slave trade and the brutality and horror that it was. And so when George Floyd was killed, there was renewed impetus for Black Lives Matter, a need to study our history afresh and our children to understand where the end of the slave trade came from. Was it William Wilberforce and his loquacious speeches in Parliament? Yes, at one level, he got the bill through. It ended the slave trade and ultimately ended slavery in legal form. But in reality, the slave trade was ended by the uprisings of slaves in Jamaica, in Grenada, in the USA, and so many other places. It was the people that suffered that rose up against it and ended Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-black racism, abuse of 3 brilliant young footballers because they didn't quite succeed in winning a trophy. So stand with them, stand with all those that are victims, and let's build that society that recognises diversity as a strength, that recognises a multi-faith, multilingual, multicultural society isn't a problem, it's something to be very proud of. Our health service, our education, our science, our learning, our transport, our standards of living come in part from what's been done in this country by migrants and refugees. And on Monday and Tuesday, Parliament will be debating the Nationality and Borders Bill. That Nationality and Borders Bill seeks to criminalise people who help others. I'll tell you for why. Last Sunday, a lifeboat towed a dinghy into a harbour in North Kent. It saved the lives of 20 desperate people, as Imran pointed out, in the Channel. They didn't choose to try and cross the English Channel in a leaky dinghy without any proper motor or anything else. They didn't choose to have to march, walk or hide their way across Europe. They wanted a place of safety for them and their children. Were they exploited on the way by people traffickers, people smugglers? No doubt they were. And that crew on the lifeboat that saved them and brought them ashore, under the legislation planned and under the legislation in operation in some European countries, that lifeboat crew would be criminalised for saving life at sea. Have we so lost our humanity that we cannot see a human being trying to survive and make their way in this difficult and complicated world through anything other than the prism of hostile right-wing media that demonises all those that are trying to survive in this world? So let's be strong here in Bradford and elsewhere. The Stop the War Coalition was founded to unite people. When we come together, we debate, we discuss, but above all we unite to march together for a world of peace, a world of justice and a world of unity. Thank you, Bradford, for what you've done.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Can I call this rally to an end now? But before I do so, can we have security, please?
Lock him up.
Right. Can I before we part here today, we want to thank everybody for coming, taking the time out.
Free! Free! Palestine! Free! Free!
Palestine!
Free! Free!
Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. Free, free. Now, before I say thank you to all our speakers, I'm going to remind people one more time, there are many, many hundreds of boxes of food. Please take some food. If you have family at home, take them. So we will have to get rid of all of them and we will give them away.
Okay, so thanks for joining us in Centenary Square for the Free Palestine protest. Just heard from Jeremy Corbyn, the headline speaker here today. We're going to leave it there, but again, thank you for joining us. Full story will be on Yorkshire Live website later.